June 6, 1944. The shores of Normandy bled under the relentless Allied assault, a brutal symphony of lead and fire that marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's fortress Europe. Thousands of young German men, snatched from their homes and thrust into the crucible of war, fought with desperate ferocity against an unstoppable tide. Many would fall, their lives extinguished on the blood-soaked beaches and in the hedgerow country of France. But countless others would face a different fate, capture. For these soldiers, the terror of combat was replaced by the gnawing fear of the unknown, a future shrouded in the ominous shadow of enemy captivity. The propaganda machine of the Third Reich had painted a grim picture of American and British brutality, a narrative designed to steal the resolve of its fighting men. German soldiers were told to expect starvation, torture, and summary executions at the hands of their Western adversaries. They were indoctrinated with tales of inhumane treatment, a chilling vision of retribution that preyed on their deepest anxieties. This manufactured dread, ingrained through years of relentless rhetoric, became the lens through which they viewed their impending capture. As the Allied advance pressed deeper into France and Belgium, the sheer number of German prisoners overwhelmed existing holding facilities. Makeshift enclosures sprang up in fields, guarded by weary but triumphant GIs. The initial days of captivity were often chaotic, marked by long marches, rudimentary rations, and the ever-present threat of Allied air superiority. Many German soldiers, still reeling from the shock of defeat and the trauma of battle, clung to the grim expectations fostered by their Nazi overlords. The logistical challenge of processing and housing hundreds of thousands of enemy combatants was immense. The United States, far removed from the direct ravages of war, emerged as the most viable solution. Across the vast American landscape, an elaborate network of prisoner-of-war camps began to take shape, designed to accommodate the influx of captured Axis personnel. It was a monumental undertaking, an unprecedented effort to manage a foreign army within the nation's borders. Among these camps, a constellation of facilities blossomed across the dusty plains of Texas. Far from the battlefields of Europe, these sprawling complexes were built with an efficiency that belied their grim purpose. They were not, however, the hellish landscapes depicted in Nazi propaganda. Instead, many offered a stark contrast to the destruction and deprivation that had become the daily reality in Germany. These camps, often located near existing military bases or in isolated rural areas, promised an unexpected reprieve. For the German prisoners, the journey across the Atlantic was a disorienting odyssey. Crammed into transport ships, they traversed the vast expanse of ocean, each wave carrying them further from their shattered homeland and deeper into the heart of their enemy's territory. The journey was long and arduous, a time for introspection and the rekindling of fears. What awaited them on the distant shores of America? Would the stories of Allied savagery prove true? Upon arrival in American ports, they were processed with a swift, dispassionate efficiency. Their uniforms, often tattered and stained with the grime of battle, were exchanged for drab, marked clothing. Identity tags were issued, and personal belongings were inventoried. It was a dehumanizing process, stripping them of their soldierly identity and reducing them to mere numbers within a vast administrative system. Yet, amidst the sterile procedures, a subtle undercurrent of order and professionalism was apparent. The destination for many of these prisoners was Texas, a state synonymous with vastness and an almost mythical sense of rugged independence. As their trains chugged across the American landscape, the German soldiers peered out through the windows, observing a country untouched by the bombs and blight of war. The lush fields, the bustling towns, the sheer abundance of resources. It was a sight that stood in stark contrast to the devastation they had left behind. This initial glimpse hinted at a reality far removed from their preconceived notions. When the trains finally pulled into the sidings of towns like Herne, Mahia, and Gainesville, the German prisoners were met not by snarling dogs and armed guards brandishing whips, but by a scene of quiet, almost pastoral calm. The Texas sun beat down on dusty roads, and the air was often thick with the scent of dry earth and distant scrub. They disembarked, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and exhaustion, and began the final leg of their journey to the camps. The sight that greeted them was often astonishing. Instead of barbed wire entanglements stretching into infinity, they saw well-ordered rows of barracks, painted in muted colors that blended with the landscape. There were administrative buildings, mess halls, recreation areas, and even small infirmaries. The camps were enclosed, of course, by fences and watchtowers, but the overall impression was one of structure and purpose, not punitive confinement. One prisoner, a young Wehrmacht corporal named Klaus, recalled his arrival at Camp Hearn in the summer of 1944. "We expected a dungeon, a place of suffering," he later wrote in his memoirs. "But what we saw, it was clean. So clean. It had the look of a new village, not a prison. It was a shocking sight after everything we had been told." This sentiment was echoed by many of his comrades, a collective bewilderment at the unexpected normalcy of their surroundings. Inside the barracks, the conditions were surprisingly humane. Each prisoner was assigned a cot, often with a mattress and blankets, luxuries that had become scarce in the waning days of the Eastern Front. The barracks were spaced out, allowing for air circulation, and many had windows that let in natural light. There was a sense of order, a system in place that seemed to prioritize basic human needs, a stark contrast to the ad hoc, often brutal conditions of temporary holding pens in Europe. The most immediate and profound shock for many was the food. After years of dwindling rations, ersatz ingredients, and the constant gnawing pangs of hunger in Germany, the sheer abundance of American provisions was almost unbelievable. 3 square meals a day, often consisting of fresh meat, vegetables, bread, and even dessert. The quality and quantity were astounding, a feast for eyes and stomachs that had long grown accustomed to scarcity. The first meal, remembered another prisoner, Private Hans Schmidt, who spent time at Camp House, was a revelation. Real coffee, not ersatz. Fresh bread, thick slices of meat. I thought it must be a trick, a special occasion. But it was every day. Every single day. We ate better than we had in years. It was humbling. The psychological impact of this generosity, after expecting deprivation, was profound. It began to chip away at the edifice of Nazi propaganda. Beyond sustenance, the camps offered a surprising array of amenities. Recreation rooms were equipped with ping-pong tables, board games, and even musical instruments. Libraries, often stocked with German-language books and newspapers, provided intellectual stimulation and a connection to their culture. Sports fields allowed prisoners to engage in soccer, volleyball, and other athletic pursuits, fostering a sense of camaraderie and relieving the monotony of captivity. The American approach to prisoner of war management was rooted in the Geneva Conventions, which mandated humane treatment and appropriate living conditions. While the primary goal was to contain and control enemy combatants, there was also a recognition of their rights as prisoners of war. This adherence to international law, even in the midst of a global conflict, spoke volumes about the values of the democratic nations. Medical care was another area of unexpected comfort. Camp infirmaries were staffed by American doctors and nurses, and often by captured German medical personnel as well. Prisoners received treatment for their injuries, illnesses, and chronic conditions. Surgeries were performed, medicines administered, and the general health of the prisoner population was monitored. For men who had faced woefully inadequate medical attention on the battlefield, this level of care was a welcome, if unsettling, surprise. The German prisoners, many of whom were loyal to the Nazi regime, found themselves grappling with an ideological crisis. They had been taught to despise Americans as decadent, weak, and cruel. Yet, the reality of their captivity challenged these deeply ingrained prejudices. The efficient, almost benevolent administration of the camps forced them to confront a stark dissonance between propaganda and experience. "We were told they were savages," recounted a former prisoner from Camp POW. "But they treated us with respect. They fed us. They gave us work. They let us play sports. It was not the hell we were promised." It made you question everything. This internal conflict was a common thread among many of the captured soldiers, particularly those who had been ardent believers in the Nazi cause. The American strategy was not entirely altruistic, it was also pragmatic. Well-treated prisoners were less likely to cause trouble, attempt escapes, or harbor deep-seated resentment that could be exploited in future conflicts. Moreover, The U.S. hoped to showcase its democratic values, subtly undermining Nazi ideology, and perhaps even turning some prisoners into future allies in the post-war world. Many prisoners were offered opportunities for work, contributing to the American war effort in non-military capacities. They toiled in agricultural fields, harvesting crops vital for the nation's food supply. They worked in forestry projects, cutting timber and clearing land. Some were even employed in maintenance tasks within the camps themselves. These jobs, while sometimes physically demanding, provided a sense of purpose and a small wage, which could be used to purchase items at the camp canteen. This canteen, a small general store within the camp, offered a variety of goods: cigarettes, toiletries, snacks, and even craft supplies. The ability to earn and spend money, however meager, restored a degree of autonomy to the prisoners' lives, a stark contrast to the absolute deprivation they had been led to expect. It was a small but significant gesture, fostering a sense of normalcy in an otherwise abnormal situation. The cultural shock was not limited to the physical comforts. For many German prisoners, their interactions with American guards and civilians revealed a different facet of their enemy. While official policy dictated a degree of separation, casual encounters and observations chipped away at the caricatures they had been fed. The guards, often young men from rural American towns, were not the monstrous figures of Nazi propaganda. They were simply soldiers, doing their duty. Stories abounded of small acts of kindness: a guard sharing a cigarette, a friendly wave, a conversation about family or life back home. These seemingly insignificant interactions had a profound impact, demonstrating the common humanity that transcended the uniforms and the conflict. The enemy, it turned out, was not a faceless, monolithic entity, but a collection of individuals, many of whom were simply trying to get through the war. One German officer, captured during the Ardennes offensive, described a conversation with an American sergeant at Camp Swift. "We spoke about our families," he recalled. "He showed me pictures of his children. I showed him a worn photograph of my wife. In that moment, we were not enemies, but two men, separated by circumstance, missing our loved ones." It was a strange, unsettling feeling. Such moments of shared humanity were powerful tools of ideological dismantling. The American authorities also recognized the need to differentiate between ardent Nazis and those who were simply conscripted soldiers. A process of re-education was informally implemented, particularly for the more impressionable young prisoners. Anti-Nazi literature, documentaries, and discussions were introduced, subtly challenging the tenets of their former ideology. The goal was not forced conversion, but rather to present an alternative perspective, allowing prisoners to critically examine their beliefs. Some prisoners, especially the younger ones, embraced these opportunities for re-education. They began to question the narratives they had been fed, to critically analyze the atrocities committed in the name of the Third Reich. For others, particularly the hardened ideologues, the propaganda persisted, and they remained defiant in their loyalty to Hitler. These individuals often formed cliques, attempting to maintain Nazi discipline and silence dissenting voices within the camps. The presence of these loyalists sometimes led to internal conflicts. There were instances of intimidation, even violence, against prisoners perceived as sympathetic to the Allied cause or those who dared to question Nazi ideology. American authorities, aware of these tensions, sometimes separated prisoners into different camps or sections based on their political leanings, attempting to mitigate the influence of the most fanatical elements. Despite these internal struggles, the overall experience in the Texas POW camps was one of relative tranquility and even comfort compared to the horrors of the battlefield. The rhythm of daily life settled into a predictable routine: reveille, meals, work, recreation, lights out. It was a stark contrast to the constant danger, uncertainty, and deprivation that defined life on the front lines. For many, the camps offered a period of respite, a chance to recover physically and mentally from the trauma of war. They gained weight, healed from their wounds, and were shielded from the relentless bombing campaigns that were now devastating their homeland. The irony was not lost on them. While their families in Germany endured unimaginable suffering, they, the captured enemy, were living in relative peace and security. This emotional turning point, this profound culture shock, often solidified during moments of reflection. Staring at a plate piled high with food, listening to music on the radio, or simply watching a game of soccer, many prisoners found themselves wrestling with the weight of their situation. They were safe, cared for, even respected, by the very people their leaders had demonized. It was a bewildering paradox. The letters they were allowed to send home, though censored, sometimes conveyed hints of their surprisingly comfortable existence. Families in bomb-ravaged Germany, struggling for survival, must have found these accounts difficult to reconcile with their own harsh realities. The contrast between the two worlds grew wider with each passing month, further highlighting the chasm between Nazi rhetoric and the truth. As the war in Europe drew to a close, the fate of the German prisoners became a pressing concern. The process of repatriation was complex and carefully orchestrated. Many expressed a profound apprehension about returning to a shattered homeland, a country under Allied occupation, where the future was uncertain and grim. Some had even grown accustomed to their lives in American captivity, finding a strange comfort in its predictability. The end of the war did not immediately mean freedom for all. Many remained in the camps for months, even years, as the logistical challenges of post-war Europe were addressed. Some were transferred to other Allied countries to assist with reconstruction efforts, but eventually, the vast majority made their way back to Germany, carrying with them not only the scars of war, but also the indelible memories of their time in America. The lasting impact of the Texas POW camps on the German prisoners was varied. For some, the experience served as a powerful antidote to Nazi ideology, a first-hand demonstration of democratic values and human decency. They returned to Germany with a more nuanced understanding of the world, eager to contribute to the rebuilding of a peaceful, democratic society. Others remained bitter, resentful, and clung to their fascist beliefs. But even for them, the undeniable fact of their humane treatment remained. It was a reality that defied every prophecy of their leaders, a silent testament to the difference between wartime propaganda and the unexpected complexities of human interaction. The seeds of doubt had been sown, even if they did not always blossom into full conversion. In the decades that followed, many former prisoners would look back on their time in the Texas camps with a profound sense of gratitude, mixed with the enduring melancholy of war. They remembered the warmth of the sun, the taste of American food, and the unexpected kindness of their captors. It was a chapter in their lives that defied all expectations, a bizarre interlude of peace and plenty amidst the greatest conflict in human history. The legacy of these camps is a subtle one, often overlooked in the grand narratives of World War II. Yet they stand as a quiet testament to the unexpected face of war, a place where enemy soldiers found not hell, but an improbable refuge. They experienced a side of America that shattered their preconceived notions, offering a glimpse of humanity that transcended the brutal divisions of conflict. It was a resort, in a way, born out of necessity, but imbued with an unforeseen grace, leaving an indelible mark on the lives of those who thought they would find only desolation.